as much as those we're supposed to follow. It makes no sense whatsoever. If you want us to do our job and be secure in our job, I would humbly ask you to defeat this amendment.
Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself 15 seconds to respond to the gentleman's comments. I would take issue with saying any member of this House is lazy or that this is a lazy process. Indeed, it is not. As I said, 26 states have used across-the-board cuts to get their fiscal house in order. This government is overspent. We have to get it under control. Let's complement what has been done by the appropriators and make these across-the-board cuts.
Time's expired.
At this time, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Duncan.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I rise today in support of this amendment. Folks, it's time to stop the spending insanity in this country. The American people know that government's too large, it spends too much money, and it indebts future generations. We're $14 trillion in debt, and we're $1.5 trillion in the red this year. It's got to stop. I'm part of a 87-member freshman class that said, go back to the drawing board, get us $100 billion, but don't stop there. Do not stop there. We've got hard decisions to make in this body. Everyone's got to row this boat if we're going to survive as an American government, and we've got to stop. And I support this amendment and ask you to do so as well. Thank you.
Gentleman from Washington.
I yield 1 minute to the distinguished ranking member of the Agriculture Subcommittee, Mr. Farr from California.
Gentleman from California recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to this amendment. We've been on a 3-day marathon talking about how we're going to cut, squeeze, and trim the federal government. Frankly, we haven't even hit the big stuff. 75% of the budget isn't even up for discussion here on the floor. What you're seeing with this amendment is you're taking a meat axe to essentially a bloody mess. We know this bill is going to end up not going anywhere because it doesn't really get into trying to do structural reform. If we really wanted to deal with debt, you deal with a plan to get rid of debt, not just with the hacking and hacking away. Let's devise a plan that will really make this country deal with this debt just like you do with your mortgage, a long-term mortgage, a lot of money. People aren't scared as long as they have a job to how they're going to pay their mortgage because they have a plan. That's not what we're getting at. This amendment is a meat axe to a bloody mess that ought to be opposed.
Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Reserve.
The gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Washington. Gentleman from Washington.
I yield 1 minute to the distinguished chairman of the Agriculture Subcommittee and a member of the Defense Subcommittee, Mr. Kingston of Georgia.
I thank the gentleman
for recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and rise in opposition to this amendment, and I do so as a proud RSC member and somebody who fought hard to get us to $100 billion in this cut, who has pledged to work for more cuts in FY12. I support the Goodlatte Balanced Budget Amendment and the spending cap. But I got to say to my conservative friends, when you cut across the board, who do you think is going to be in charge of where these cuts come from? The EPA director, who is putting in the clean air and all the greenhouse emission stuff? Do you think she's going to cut that out of her budget? What about the Department of Justice? You think they're going to take this out of the lawsuit money to Arizona? What about the EPA that came up with a law that dairy farmers had to have an emergency response plan if they spilled milk because it was considered an oil? What about the Immigrations Department? Do you think they're going to back off their priorities, or do you think they're going to implement RSC priorities? You and I have some disagreements with the administration, so I don't see why it helps us to empower them to make the decisions on where this 5% will come from, because I can say, if I was them, I know what I would cut, and it would not be the priorities that you would have. Thank you.
Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Sutherland.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank the gentlewoman from Tennessee for yielding time this morning. I rise in support of the Jordan Amendment. You know, many people here have taken notice that many of us are freshmen. Well, I'm a freshman, and I'm proud to be a freshman. And I'll tell you this, but one thing I'm not a freshman at, I'm not a freshman at trying to perpetuate my family's 55-year-old business that's struggling under the taxation and the regulation of this federal government. I'm not a freshman when it comes to that. I'm an expert. because that's what my dad did and that's what my granddad did. And God willing, if this body practices courage and does what is right, my children and my grandchildren down the line will be able to continue and perpetuate that line of tradition. You know, I hear the word meat axe and draconian. What's draconian and meat axe is leaving every American in this country with $43,000 of national debt, $14 trillion of debt, which puts us at a very weak standing among the world who owns now 50% of our debt. That is a security issue. People stand here and they talk about security. Nothing is greater to our security than making sure that we own our debt rather than those countries around the world who mean us harm. Madam Chair, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Time's expired. The gentleman from Washington.
I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Florida, from Melbourne, Florida, where my uncle was the former mayor, Mr. Posey.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my friend across the aisle for the time. I thought the across-the-board cuts were not supposed to apply to national security. I thought we were going to make cuts like the folks back home make cuts. If a family back home gives an across-the-board 5% cut and they apply it, they're in deep trouble. They might be able to cut back on their entertainment. They might be able to not go out to eat an extra night. They may be able to cut back on their water or their electric usage. But if they pay their mortgage company 5% less than that's due for their security over their head, they're out on the street, and they end up in bigger problems than they started. So I think that's why we need to make these cuts surgically in our budget. Let's take NASA, for example. The committee already cut over $300 million from the NASA budget. The Wiener Amendment cut $300 million more almost. Why would anyone want to yield the ultimate military high ground, which is space, to countries who in the very best of times are not friendly to us? Space is the free world's Golan Heights. I implore my colleagues to help defeat this very, very well-intended but misguided amendment. Thank you very much.
Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Campbell.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the lady from Tennessee for yielding. You know, I came down here because I heard the opposition to this amendment decrying about the devastation that will occur to the country if this amendment were to pass, and I'd like to make just 2 points. One, discretionary spending in this country has increased 38% in the last 4 years. 38%. Has American spending increased 38%? Has Americans' income increased 38%? No. All this amendment does is it asks the government to spend what it spent 2 years ago. Most Americans would probably like to do that. Why is that such a devastation? But there's even a greater reason. We have a $1.5 going to $1.6 trillion deficit if we do not get this debt under control and fast. We will be making cuts of 50% overnight because of the debt crisis that will hit when people stop buying our debt. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, this amendment does not threaten government services. It is actually a step towards saving them from the debt crisis that is ahead of us. I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington.
I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Frelinghuysen, who's the chairman of the Energy and Water Appropriations Committee and a valued senior member of the Defense Subcommittee.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank the gentleman for
1 minute.
yielding. I'd like to associate my remarks with those who rise to oppose this amendment, basically because it's across the board. Right now, we are affecting the Army Corps of Engineers in a way that will affect most of our major navigation around the country: Mississippi, Missouri, Ohio River. We need to get these projects moving. They're important to commerce, billions of dollars of commerce, suppliers, producers. And lastly, there's a national security aspect. We need to maintain the reliability of our nuclear stockpile. That's under the Department of Energy. There's nothing more important than nuclear stockpile. Protecting that stockpile, making sure it's reliable, and that we meet the requirements of cleanups across the nation. Across-the-board cuts would impact that in a big way, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Reserve.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Washington.
How much time do we have on both sides?
Gentleman from Washington has 2 minutes remaining. The gentlelady from Tennessee has 4 1/4 minutes remaining.
I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman for Virginia,
the chairman of the Science, Justice, and State, what is it? Yeah, Commerce, Justice, and State. Excuse me.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
That's fine. That's good.
I yield you 1 minute.
Thank you. I rise in opposition to the amendments. If we really want to deal with getting deficits under control, we got to deal with entitlements, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. That's where we have to go. Secondly, this really will result in the layoffs of several hundred FBI agents at the FBI. I was met with Director Mueller on Friday. Can you see the message when Osama bin Laden in a cave in Pakistan hears that the FBI has had a layoff of FBI agents? Thirdly, it would require layoffs of the DEA. Lastly, for anybody interested in NASA, and our members, so many members came up and said, please help NASA. This would result in a $1 billion cut of NASA and losses of thousands of jobs, not only of NASA employees, but also NASA contractors in Alabama, in Florida, in Texas, in California, and around the country. I urge defeat of the amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield the balance of our time to the gentleman from Ohio, the author of this amendment, Mr. Jordan.
The gentleman from Ohio has yielded the balance of their time, which is 4 1/4.
Okay, I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Madam Speaker, let me start by thanking the Appropriations Committee. I do appreciate the work they've done. Look, this is unprecedented. Appropriators cutting tens of billions of dollars, getting the $100 billion that is so important and what we told the voters we were going to do. I appreciate that. But I still am struck with this fact. One thing that the American people understand is spending is out of control. There is no way around it. And several speakers have went through and listed this program that would be impacted, this agency that would be impacted. Look, I understand that. It's not pleasant to reduce spending. I get that. But I always bring it back to what the typical family has to do. Think about the family out there who is making $50,000 a year and spending $85,000. There are some good things that other $35,000 is being spent on. Probably some very good things. Maybe some things that are great for that. Maybe they're going out to dinner and they have an entertainment night and they're doing good things, healthy things for their family. But the point is they're spending more than they're taking in, and they have to cut back, even if some of those things are positive things. And the federal government is even worse because we're taking in 50, spending 85 year after year after year. And the president's budget highlights that. We run trillion-dollar deficits for the next decade. We pile up more debt on top of the $14 trillion. This amendment builds on a good bill and simply says, let's get to a full $100 billion in savings outside of national defense, in non-security savings. We think that's a good first step towards putting this country on a path that is actually sustainable, towards, as the gentleman from Arizona pointed out, towards at least reducing our deficit by 1/15. Imagine that, just 1/15. This is what the American people sent us here to do. This is what the American people elected 87 freshman Republicans to do. Just this very thing, to reduce spending. And I just want to finish with this, because sometimes the people of this country say it a lot better than the politicians. In my time in public life, I have never seen the American people more receptive to the things that have to be done to fix this country. They get it. The central question is, will the political class demonstrate the same commitment, the same courage that the American people have demonstrated over the last year? Let me read you this, and this just came to our office 2 days ago. Dear Representative Jordan, my research center receives the majority of its funding from Federal Department of Education sources. If those funds are cut, we stand to lose our programs and, as a result, maybe our livelihoods. However, my greater concern is with the future of this nation. Federal spending, if not dramatically cut, will inevitably lead to this nation's ruin and will destroy all opportunities for our children. We must bring sanity back to the management of our nation's fiscal resources. Jim, our forefathers pledged their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor to create an exceptional nation where our rights are endowed by our Creator. If I have to sacrifice my livelihood to maintain this great experiment called America, it's the very least I can do in service to this country. Please stand firm in your fight for fiscal responsibility to preserve this great nation. Colleagues, that's the standard of the American people. That's the commitment we have to meet. That's what this debate's all about. If we don't do this, the future for our kids and our grandkids is diminished. This is about making sure America remains the greatest country in history. I urge a yes vote on the amendment and yield back our time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Idaho, Mike Simpson, who has been the ranking member on Interior and now the chairman of the Interior
And that is the remainder of the time.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. It's important to remember what we're doing here. We're dealing with a CR that funds the government for the last seven months. This is not a full-year appropriation bill. We're dealing with a much shorter period of time. So the $100 billion that we were asked to reduce in this budget, if you looked at it, by the time this probably gets done, would in effect be about $200 billion if it were a full-year appropriation bill. The Appropriations Committee has done its job. It has done what our conference asked us to do. You know, we have actually had amendments on the floor that would reduce some accounts to less than what they have in the appropriation process. So they would, I guess they'd be paying us, I don't know. But some of the amendments have just gone too far. This one, I think, goes too far, and as some have said, across-the-board cuts don't give us the opportunity to decide what our priorities are. What we need to do is make sure that we get this amendment defeated, that we get this resolution, this CR, to fund the government for the last 7 months passed, and then get on with doing a budget for 2012, which was not done last year, and pass the appropriation bills so that we can fund the government for the next year at a level that I think many of the RSC members will be happy with when we get that
Gentleman's
done.
time's expired and all time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the
I move to strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman's recognized.
I yield 1 minute to a distinguished lady from Texas, Kay Granger,
Gentleman may not yield blocks of
chairman of
time.
State Foreign Ops Approps.
Gentleman may not yield blocks of time. Gentleman may yield, but not blocks of time. Gentlelady from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the Jordan Amendment. This amendment would cut an additional $2.5 billion from the State Foreign Operations title of the CR, after the subcommittee has brought significant and thoughtful cuts to the table. This title is already $10 billion below 2010, including supplementals. To achieve that, we put lower priority programs on pause, reduced and eliminated underperforming, wasteful, and duplicative programs, and zeroed out administrative priorities like climate change. The programs that are funded in the State Foreign Operations title of this bill protect our top national security priorities. The gentleman claims his amendment exempts national security, but it does not exempt the national security provisions in the State Foreign Operations title. The Jordan Amendment reduces U.S. operations in frontline states, including Afghanistan and Iraq. The subcommittee has tried to responsibly protect these funds from drastic reductions in the State Foreign Ops title, given that we have men and women in harm's way in our civilian forces just as we do in our military forces. Aside from cutting $450 million from security assistance, the amendment would cut $55 million from the Pakistan Counterinsurgency Capability Fund. Israel is protected.
Yield to me for a second.
I will yield.
I would like to yield to some other members, and you've done a very nice job, and we appreciate your strong statement. I'd like to yield to the chairman of the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee, THUD, Mr. Latham from Iowa.
I thank the gentleman. Thank the gentleman for yielding, and I appreciate very much what's going on and the reduction of spending. I'm just very concerned that this is not really a thoughtful way of doing it, that if we're after waste, fraud, and abuse in our budget, this is going to cripple us as far as finding out where those places are. It will continue to fund items, lines in the budget that have waste, fraud, and abuse, and will not eliminate those. And also, when you look at just the transportation portion, I think the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Alber, brought the point up too, but this would in fact stop air traffic control for a period of weeks And I don't think many of us here would like to see our airports closed down for several weeks because we don't have air traffic control, and that's exactly what would happen. So I appreciate very much the gentleman yielding.
Regaining my time, I yield to the gentlelady from Missouri, the chairman of the Financial Services Appropriations Subcommittee.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to echo the words of all of our colleagues in opposition to this bill. Let me talk a little bit about two things that in my bill, in the financial services bill, that would be drastically impacted. Number one, an additional 5.5% cut totaling $1.02 billion would actually reduce assistance to small businesses, would hurt agencies that protect American citizens from deceptive business practices and fraud. In addition to that, it would result in dangerous cuts to the Treasury Department's Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, funding for enforcement of Iran sanctions, judicial security, and drug task forces. I realize it's a well-intentioned effort, but it goes too far, and I urge a no vote and yield back.
All right. Madam Chairman, I yield to the distinguished gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Moran, for
gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Madam Chairwoman, the CR, I believe, is irresponsible. But this amendment would commit this country to an economic death spiral. It may sound like heresy, but the reality is you can't run the strongest government and the strongest economy in the world at less than 15% of GDP. Look back to the Clinton years when we were at 20%. We had the strongest economy ever. People at the top tax rates brought home more after-tax income than any time in American history. We created 23 million more jobs, and we had a surplus. And that surplus is what we should be aiming for. Not only do we need to cut spending, sure, but we also need to raise revenue. We need to come to balance. This is an imbalanced amendment. It's an irresponsible one, and our country and our people deserve better. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
In closing, let me point out that the amendment to impose an across-the-board cut would allow OMB to make the individual funding decisions. We have spent 4 days and nights thoughtfully considering programs and levels. This amendment is not thoughtful and should be defeated.
Gentleman's time's expired. All time having expired, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Tennessee. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Speaker, recorded vote.
The lady from Tennessee requests a recorded vote, and pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Tennessee will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Madam Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk, 199.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 199, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Poe of Texas.
Pursuant to the order of the House of February 17, 2011, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, and a member opposed will each control.
Madam Chair, I reserve a point of order on the gentleman's motion.
5 minutes. The point of order is reserved, and the chair will recognize the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I understand a point of order is reserved by the other side. This legislation, this amendment to the CR is very simple. Arizona, the state of Arizona, has implemented laws in its state to protect the dignity and sovereignty of the state. The United States federal government, in all of its awesome power, has jumped in and sued the state of Arizona at taxpayer expense, preventing them from enforcing the rule of law in their own state. The federal government doesn't enforce the rule of law on the borders. Just recently, the GAO has reported that only 44% of the border is secure. That means somebody else controls the other 56% of the southern border, and it's not the United States of America. Arizona is trying to protect its people. The federal government won't protect the border, but yet it sues the state of Arizona. And this legislation would prohibit the federal government from using its resources and any money to implement the lawsuit against the United States of America versus the state of Arizona and Janice Brewer, the governor thereof. It's a very simple amendment, and I yield the remainder of my time to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Carter.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank my friend for yielding
And I understand that the point of order has been raised, but this is serious business we're talking about here. The sovereign state of Arizona is being overrun by dangerous people. There are being murders up and down that border. I've been to that Arizona border. I've seen the fence being built in Arizona, and I've seen the fence that it replaced, which wouldn't even hold in a pair of goats. And yet we have a flood flying across that border. And so what does the governor of that state do? Steps forward and says, the federal government's not meeting its obligation. We're going to protect our citizens. Now, one of the things that I've been very concerned about, I will yield to my friend in a moment. One of the things I've been very concerned about as I've watched the judiciary and the legal system develop is we've learned how to use our court system as a battering ram against our opponents, both our opponents in business and now our opponents in politics and in other places, just to batter them into position. The United States government should not be battering the state of Arizona into a position that the state believes is contrary to the will of their people. And I will now yield to my friend.
And I want to thank my friend Congressman Carter for yielding. See, the problem I have is that 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago, there was great debate about the states who took on the federal government over a question of the constitutionality of the Obamacare. And there was a decision that was rendered, and that's going to go to appeal, and everybody is happy because they agree with the decision. In Arizona, Arizona decided to pass SB 1070. It went to federal court. Judge Bolton decided that some sections were constitutional, some were unconstitutional, and we're now going through the process of the Ninth Circuit and probably to the Supreme Court. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So I would tell you, why don't you let the process occur, and that way we'll know whether or not Arizona has the power to do deal with immigration, and whether or not the states can deal with the constitutional issue of Obamacare. And I yield back, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. I appreciate it.
And I yield what time I have left back to Judge Poe.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. This issue is an issue of public safety, which is the first obligation of the federal government, to protect the people, to protect the homeland. And that is why it's important the federal government get out of the way of the state of Arizona trying to protect the good citizens there in Arizona from the drug cartels that are coming into their state. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Does the gentleman continue to reserve his point of order?
I continue to reserve. I concur with what Congressman Pastor said, and I'd like to, before I insist on my point of order, yield to the gentleman from Arizona for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized. Does the gentleman seek time in opposition? Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Yes.
Thank you, and thank you for extending time. My strong opposition to this amendment is because it would bar the Department of Justice or any other federal agency from challenging the constitutionality of this law in Arizona or any other law. The precedent being set by this amendment, by the Poe Amendment, if it were to adopt it, would establish a dangerous, dangerous new standard. It opens the door to congressional restraints on active pending Department of Justice litigation in a potentially endless variety of cases through backdoor defunding moves. The precedent being set here, and I appreciate the gentleman's point about the Arizona working its will. There is also this people that believe in the Constitution, as we all do, would want to know that the law in Arizona passes constitutional muster. This is what this lawsuit's about. This is why we have separation of powers. This is why we have a Constitution, to protect the interest of all people. SB 70, you can support it. I can oppose it. The point being that there is a third part of our government that will decide whether or not this law is constitutional, and I believe all of us would like to uphold constitutional laws. Thank you. Now you're back.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania continue to make his point of order.
I'd like to insist on my point of order. Thank you.
Gentleman will state his point of order.
I make a point of order against the amendment because it proposes to change existing law and constitutes legislation in an appropriations bill and therefore violates Clause 2 of Rule 21. The rule states in the pertinent part, an amendment to a general appropriations bill shall not be in order if changing existing law.
Does any other member wish to speak to the point of order?
Wish to speak in opposition.
Gentleman from Texas.
The law does not legislate. In fact, it prohibits legislation. All it does is tell the Department of Justice they can't spend any money on this lawsuit. And I would accept the ruling of the chair.
Any other member wish to speak to the point of order? If not, the chair is prepared to rule. The chair finds that this amendment imposes new duties on the relevant federal officials. By limiting funds for the continuation of a case, the amendment would require the agencies to make a determination as to what constitutes continuation of a case. The amendment therefore constitutes legislation in violation of Clause 2 of Rule 21, and the point of order is sustained and the amendment is not in order. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in the congressional record on which further proceedings were postponed in the following order. Amendment number 50, Ms. McCollum of Minnesota. Amendment number 232, Mr. Nadler of New York. Amendment 214, Mr. Klein of Minnesota. Amendment number 11, Mr. Pence of Indiana. Amendment number 533, Mr. Young of Alaska. Amendment 524, Mr. Nadler of New York. Amendment 466, Mr. Poe of Texas. Amendment 575, Mr. Rehberg of Montana. Amendment 267, Mr. King of Iowa. Amendment 268, Mr. King of Iowa. Amendment 83, Ms. Emerson of Missouri. Amendment 89, Mr. King of Wisconsin. Amendment 88, Mr. King of Wisconsin. Amendment 104, Ms. Blackburn of Tennessee. The other business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 50, printed in the congressional record, offered by the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Ms. McCollum, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 50, printed in the congressional record, offered by Ms. McCollum of Minnesota.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of a request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote, followed by a series of two-minute votes.
So the House returns to work today after another fairly late night of voting, trying to wrap up debate on that list of close to 600 amendments to the federal spending bill. They adjourned a little after 1 this morning after agreeing to limit debate on the remaining amendments. First votes of the day today, starting with an amendment prohibiting the use of funds by the Defense Department for sponsorship of NASCAR race cars. This is a 15-minute vote. This will be followed by 2-minute votes for the rest of the series of 14. We will open our phone lines to get your thoughts on the debate they started the day with. A number of amendments at the beginning of the session were directed toward trying to defund the health care law. Congressman Rehberg of Montana offered an amendment that was debated for at least 60 minutes. Congressman King of Iowa also offered amendments. Each of those were debated for 10 minutes, and there were a few more of those. Before we go to the phone lines, we're going to show you floor debate from earlier today on one of those amendments brought by Congressman King, cutting all funds to carry out provisions of the health care law.
The gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 1 minute.
The Republicans seem to be pretending that emergency room care is free. Every insured American's paying an extra $1,100 this year, $1,400 in Oregon, for those who are uninsured. We want to begin to address that problem. Get them in earlier. Get them treatment. Less expensive. Don't pass the costs on to other Americans. Personal responsibility. We outlawed the worst abuses of the insurance industry. canceling your policy when you get sick, even though you've been paying the premiums, preventing people from getting health care because of a pre-existing condition. I heard from a dad whose young son with birth defects is finally getting covered for those issues because of this law. And then the students I met at Lane Community College, 21, 22, 23 years old, getting an education, wanting to get in the workforce, they thanked me for their health insurance. They need that health insurance. The Republicans said they were going to repeal and replace. Well, they've been pretty darn silent on the replace side, maybe because it upsets their patrons in the insurance industry who are so generous at campaign time.
Chairman's time has expired. The gentleman from Iowa, continue reserve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Iowa is recognized now for the balance of his time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really take issue with the gentleman from Oblivia that declared this to be nonsense. This is not nonsense. This is very, very serious business. This is the largest taking of American liberty in the history of this country. And the shenanigans that went on to put this bill in place, you could not have set this bill out on the floor of the 111th Congress and had it pass if it were all packaged up together in one big stack. It was two pieces of bills, and we listened to Dr. Burgess earlier about all of the things that took place to represent this bill in one place or another to put it together, including a promise of an executive order that was designed to trump the very Congress itself. And here we are with the first opportunity to put the brakes on Obamacare. Yes, we've passed the repeal H.R. 2. This is H.R. 1. It's here because it's more important to the Speaker than H.R. 2. And that means that we must shut off this funding to Obamacare. This CRS report, $105 billion automatically appropriated over a 10-year period of time that goes on in perpetuity, sending the tentacles of this malignant tumor down. It is metastasizing as we speak, and American liberty is being strangled off by Obamacare. This amendment is the amendment that shuts off all of the funding within the CR. It must be passed by this Congress to keep faith with the American people. I'd yield back.
That debate from earlier today, we're opening our phone lines now to get your thoughts on efforts to remove funding for health care from the 2011 spending bill. Should it be removed? Numbers are on the screen, 202-585-3885 for Republicans, 202-585-3886 for Democrats, and for independents, your number to call, 202-585-3887. First is Julie in St. Joseph, Missouri, on the Republicans line.
Good morning. I would just like to say, as a citizen, I'm outraged with the arrogance of the Democrats, and I'd also like I'd like to know, if this is so great, why aren't they telling everybody that on page 1000 to 1007 that you're required to have an RFID chip implanted in your body to get health care?
Mike in New York City, Democrats line.
Thank you for C-SPAN. That lady's wacky, but and you know, and there it is that you have right wingers that come up with these crazy theories that have no substance at all. Yet they, even in some of the talk shows on television, they'll begin to present wacko ideas, try to make them credible. But I just wanted to say that I'm a Democrat, and I almost have a Republican position regarding the requirement that people pay for health insurance, the mandate. I believe people should be mandated and to buy their own health insurance, and I feel like it's more of a Republican position.
That's a Republican position?
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that it's a conservative position. I don't know where the Tea Party is on this and why they're not outspoken, but it's conservative in the sense that I don't want to pay for the next guy's premium who basically gets his health insurance from the emergency room when he needs it. It raises my premium. Lastly, if you'll allow me, there ought to be a grand Medicare buy-in, and I don't know why the actuaries have not gone through, crunched the numbers, where people like myself who pay about $500 a month premium, but I'm healthy. 80% of people who buy health insurance don't use their health insurance, but we're still paying premiums the health insurance company that I use gets about $6,000 off of me every year. There's 160 million people paying into private health insurance companies that if we had an opportunity to buy into Medicare, all of that profit could stay in the system and pay for the health insurance.
We got your point. We're going to move on. Thanks for your call. Next to Bob in Woodlands, Texas, Independent Line.
Yes, I was just calling regarding the advertising of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines on NASCAR.
Well, we're asking right now about how you feel about the Republicans' efforts to defund health care.
Oh, I see. Well, I'm in favor of it.
Next to Larry, Columbia, North Carolina, calling on the Republicans' line.
Yes, sir. I am a traditional conservative Republican, and I'm proud of it. I am completely 120% in favor of defunding health care. The only problem I have with the health care, I'd like the health care bill, but the only thing I disagree with is, you know, they can't force somebody to buy something they don't want to buy. That's like me walking into 7-Eleven and forcing somebody to buy a Hershey's bar. If they don't want it, don't force them to buy it.
We heard one congressman make the point that many states require you to buy car insurance.
I'm not familiar on that subject, but that's the only problem I have with it. You ought to have the right to buy something. If you don't want to buy something, that's your choice. That's what free will is.
Thanks, Larry. On to Richard in Chicago on the Democrats line.
Hello, I am an independent Democrat. I'm in favor of the health care, of keeping health care, but the only problem I have with this health care bill is that we're giving us a little too much in this bill, because I read the whole bill. We're giving a little too much to the Native Americans. Otherwise, I'm in strong support of this health care bill. And the other issue I have is, why are we fighting over this? Because when it goes to the Democrat-controlled Senate and a Democratic president, it's going to get vetoed. It's not even going to be thought about. So why are we even wasting time working on this? We need to be working on jobs, not health care, jobs.
Steve in Coldwater, Ohio. You're on the Independence line.
Thank you. I oppose the Republicans' attempt to defund the health care because I think we need to get health care costs under control. We're never going to have a strong economy or create jobs as long as 1/7 of our economy is built on the health care system. We've got to get the costs under control, and I think that the health care bill is a good start, and they ought to go farther, and they ought to start looking at the drug companies and these specialists that are making $1 million a year when people are going without health care. That's my opinion.
And we thank you for your call. Members right now voting on an amendment prohibiting the use of funds by the Defense Department for sponsorship of NASCAR race cars. But we're taking your calls on the efforts to block the nation's health care law, which was voted in, and those efforts largely supported by Republicans. And earlier today, there was floor debate on another amendment related to cutting funds for the health care law. Congressman Wiener.
Gentleman from New York is
Mr.
recognized.
Chair, I agree with the gentleman. His amendment is clearly in order. But I know this because if this were legislating on this bill, that would mean that they can legislate. They control the House and the Senate and the presidency. They were unable to legislate. We're here for 8 weeks. They've been unable to legislate. It's impossible to believe that he's legislating in this bill. The point of order, if I may speak to it, the point of order suggests that the gentleman is legislating on an appropriation bill. I've watched those guys. They're incapable. There's no way this is legislating. So I believe the point of order should be struck down. It is impossible. After 8 weeks, they haven't legislated. They had 8 years in the majority. They didn't legislate. How could it possibly be, Mr. Chairman, that the point of order is correct? The gentlelady from Connecticut is rarely incorrect, but if you think they're legislating, impossible. Almost metaphysically impossible for the gentleman to be legislating. He doesn't know how. How will we possibly have the legislating in this bill? I think the gentleman is absolutely correct. Let us have this debate, because if it is that moment, If lightning is striking, if it is chilly in hell, then maybe this is the moment we've been waiting for. The Republican majority is going to start legislating. Please, praise God, maybe this is the moment. So I think the gentleman is correct. He is not legislating in this bill because it is impossible for them to do so because they simply don't know how.
And back to your calls now on your thoughts on efforts that are moving ahead on removing funding for health care from the 2011 funding. Should it be removed? And we are taking your calls next to Dale in Loris, South Carolina. Is that correct? You're on the Republicans line.
Yes, sir. Well, I got a couple of questions. I'm all for throwing this ridiculous bill out. I mean, have you read this thing? Several thousand pages of moronicy, if you will. The other thing is to answer the question that you asked about the congressman. Automobile insurance is not mandated. You don't have to drive. There's no one forcing you to buy a car. So why is it that the government should be able to force you to buy health care? I mean, it's just ridiculous. What's next? They're going to force you to buy name brand chocolates or whatever else that you might consume? They're going to just give you a grocery list? And the third thing, if you will, I'll be done just, sir, is the individual makes a statement, well, I'm tired of paying for the health care visits to the emergency room. Well, I hate to tell you, this European-style health care system, which is designed to collapse our economy, I don't care what anybody says, you're still going to be paying ridiculous. I mean, you know, come on, people, it's not science, it's not brain science. I mean, look at it and use your common sense, because it seems like nobody has any in Congress anymore.
Rebecca in Manning, South Carolina, on the Democrats line.
Yes, I do not want them to defund the health care bill. It is one of the best things that they have done for health care and for the American people in this country in a long time. The Republican Party has done nothing for the last 30 years but have a let-them-eat-cake attitude toward the middle class, and this is another effort to have the American people let them eat cake and choke, and they're continuing to do this.
On to Las Vegas on the Independence line, Robert.
Yes, good morning. I think that the bill should be defunded until the constitutionality is determined by the Supreme Court. Then I'd like to see a debate on the sections with bipartisan support, such as pre-existing conditions, cost reduction, and coverage for the uninsured. And one last thing, I'd like to also see an amendment to defund the Senate Majority Leader's salary for FY 2012. Thank you.
Linda, Tampa, Florida, Republicans line.
Hi, I'm against them defunding it. If they defund it, they need to also defund their health care. They seem to have this attitude. They don't care about the poor. I don't know where they're getting their information from. The people saying this, the people saying that. The people are hurting out here. People have no jobs. People don't have homes. People have lost their homes. For 1 minute, have they thought about what happened to those kids that live with their parents that done lost their home, lost their job, and all they can think about is they self. If they defund it, they need to defund theirs too. They don't need health care either. They don't need no job either. They need to start caring about people. It's not about them anymore. It's about the people.
So just to be clear, you want funding taken away from the health care?
No, I do not want funding taken away. If they take funding away from us, they need to take funding away from themselves. How do that look? We don't have health care, but they do.
Thank you.
How does that look? We don't have a job, but they do.
Thank you for your call, Linda. Charles, Colorado, on the Democrats line.
Yes, I'm for keeping the funding in. I've worked in the semiconductor industry for almost 30 years and paid out significant amount of taxes. I haven't had a decent job in, I don't know, 4 years now. Mine and 750,000 others moved out of the country, and there's a lot of people out there that don't have the means or the wherewithal to take care of themselves. I mean, there's no jobs.
Thanks for your call. Efforts to block funds for the health care law. What do you think? 202-585-3885 for Republicans. For Democrats, it's 202-585-3886. And Independents, 202-585-3887. Our next call is Randall in Wichita, Kansas, on our Independence line.
Yes, in regards to your earlier statement about automotive insurance, well, not every individual has an automobile. That's a voluntary thing that people decide to go into, and that's why they go into insurance. The insurance on healthcare insurance is based on a condition of citizenship, and that is not the same thing. And therefore, I think that they should definitely defund it. And I think that when you force people to purchase something, you're also depriving them their property of how they want to spend their money, of how they want to.
Thanks for your call. Jim in Crofton, Maryland, Republicans line. Go ahead, Jim. Jim, are you still there? Let's try again. Jim, Crofton, Maryland.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
Okay. If I hired a lawyer and a lawyer told me to sign a contract, and I asked the lawyer if he had read that contract, and he said, no, but it's good, sign it anyway, I think I'd get another lawyer, and that's exactly what the Democrats did in passing this legislation. They brought it out at the 11th hour, 2,200 pages, nobody read it, and they passed it. It should be defunded.
Vicki, Lakin, Georgia, on the Democrats line.
Hello?
Go ahead, Vicki.
Yes. All I'm saying, everybody talking about health plans. Do they know that people are hungry, starving, nowhere to stay, no jobs, kids are killing each other? There's nothing better to do but spend more money on this. This is the last thing they need to be doing. Jobs, hungry, food, education. This is the main thing they need to be doing. People are really starving out here in America. That's all I had to say.
Going to Adrian in Minnesota. Help me with the name of your town.
Elk River.
Elk River. Okay, you're on the Independence line.
Yes, for the most part, my comment is just in the kind of the whole process. I watch C-SPAN quite a bit this year and last year, and it seems like basically everything's basically an earmark. Everything sounds good, but there's no part that actually, that regulates if these programs work or not. And they should be, like with matters of Social Security, we should see like the budget of how much Social Security actually brought in, and figure out, are we actually adding more taxpayer money from other places to supplement this? Everybody agrees with these programs, even like a lot of parts of the health plan, but you know what, it's this all or nothing sort of deal. Half of the things most people would agree to having, but it's either, you agree to 1,000 pages of funding programs, and it all gets lost in the process.
Thanks, Adrian. On to Crystal in Baltimore, Democrats line.
Hello?
Go ahead, Crystal.
Yes, I think it's very important that they fund the health care bill. I work part-time, and I pull my weight. But for them to not let this go through the system, I think it's ridiculous. People need health care. It's important to have, and people do need to pull their weight. I don't mind paying a little bit more, and like I said, I'm working part-time just to make my ends meet and barely doing that. But I'm out here every day pulling my weight, and I think others need to also pay a little bit towards that health care plan, too. They need to let it go through the system and see how it plays out. After we see, maybe after a year, how it works out. If they need to make changes, make the changes then, but let it go through the system. Holder just reported how there's so much fraud in Medicare. 100 doctors and nurses have been arrested for fraud because of Medicare. Medicare is damaged, is messed up because there's a lot of fraud in there.
Greenville, North Carolina. Alfred's calling on the Republicans line.
Hi.
Alfred, I'm going to ask you to turn your TV down.
Okay.
Alfred, I'm going to ask you to turn your TV down.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Both me and my father were members of the Tea Party in Eastern North Carolina, and I'm really for defunding the health care because I just feel there's too much spending going on, and I think that we need to use some other strategies such as tort reform and even like, you know, help among states, like, you know, bring costs down.
Edmonton, Kentucky, Independence line. Linda.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I'm for defunding the health care bill.
Tell us why.
Because it was passed in back rooms after we were assured that all debates were going to be on, C-SPAN, which I happen to watch regularly. There wasn't any debates on C-SPAN. We don't know what was in it. I've only become an independent in the last few years. For 45 years, I was a Democrat. I have never been a Republican, but I voted.
Linda, we're going to stop you there. Thanks for your call.
On this vote, the yeas are 148, the nays are 281. The amendment is not agreed to. Committee will be in order. Will members please take their seats? The committee will be in order. Will members please take their seats? Committee will be in order. Will members please take their seat? Does the majority leader rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I will be brief. First of all, I want to thank Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Dix and their incredible staff for the leadership and amazing endurance that they have displayed through this process.
Committee will be in order.
Madam Speaker, they, along with the staff of the Parliamentarian's Office, the Clerk's Office, the Congressional Budget Office, the Sergeant-at-Arms Office, many of the leadership offices, members' offices, and of course the Capitol Police, have been working around the clock, literally, in order for us. Now, Madam Speaker, we've had an extraordinary debate, and I want to thank the members for their patience. I want to thank members for their patience, their enthusiasm, their participation in this remarkable development of events in this debate. I would say to members that all of us want to finish and complete this bill today. Madam Speaker, I would say, as members know, we are operating under a unanimous consent agreement, and under that agreement, we still have 18 hours of debate and 103 amendments to go. Now, while none of us want to restrict anyone's ability to speak their piece and voice their opinion, certainly a lot has been said throughout the last 80-some hours of discussion on this bill. So I would ask members to be mindful of the prudence of being concise and expeditious in their remarks. And if we proceed in that vein, Madam Speaker, perhaps we could finish at a reasonable hour this evening. And with that, I yield back.
Back.
You, just for a second. I'm sorry to do this to you, Leader, but just for a moment, I recognize you're recognizing Mr. Rogers and Mr. Dix and others, our staff, for their fabulous work, but I think it would be a shame if we didn't recognize a specific person who's essentially been Mr. Rogers' right hand during all of this discussion. He's leaving the House at the end of the month to go to the private sector, a fabulous, fabulous guy who is respected on both sides of the aisle. Let's give Jeff Shockey a hand.
Absolutely.
Without objection, 2-minute voting will